Well, when we talk monumental heavyweight title upsets, June 1st, 2019, Madison Square Garden, Dan Rafael. We'll get into where this ranks with the other great heavyweight upsets, but needless to say, it doesn't take long to come to this one. Andy Ruiz, TKO of the unified heavyweight champion, three belt heavyweight champion, Anthony Joshua. As I have said before, and you and I have done this before, but we're doing it here on this video. He will never forget his United States debut after what happened to him, Anthony Joshua, when he came over from the UK and got beat, surprisingly, shockingly, by a decided underdog. You were there ringside. What do you recall? A bunch, I'm sure, about that night.
Oh yeah, this was a special night at the fights for sure. You mentioned about how it was Anthony Joshua's much heralded United States debut. It's still the only time he's ever fought here. I believe that had he won the fight, I'm not saying he would have made United States his home, but he certainly would have come back here. I believe at some point. He was on a tremendous run. He was undefeated. He had just knocked out Alexander Povetkin in his previous fight. He had unified titles against Joseph Parker in the fight before that. I mean, he was on a real run. And this was like a big part of, remember when the Povetkin fight happened, that was the beginning of DAZN. That was their first ever boxing event. And part of building DAZN was bringing Anthony Joshua to the United States. Originally, he was supposed to fight, everybody should know this, Gerald Big Baby Miller. But Gerald Big Baby Miller, instead of training for a heavyweight prize fight, became a pharmacist and was taking every PED in the book. I broke that story that he had failed multiple of drug tests. He was dropped from the fight, and Andy Ruiz, who had scored a victory just a couple of like less than 2 months earlier, knockout against Alexander Dimitrenko, and they were looking for an opponent to replace the Gerald Miller. And as the story goes, he sent Eddie Hearn from Matchroom Boxing, Anthony Joshua's promoter, a series of direct messages on his Twitter account, saying I'm available, let's do this. And basically, he got the fight. I mean, it was kind of, not a ton of guys to pick who were going to be ready on that short notice, but Andy was relatively speaking in shape. He had just fought. He looked pretty strong in that win, and they gave him the fight. He took it on 3 weeks' notice, but even still, Anthony Joshua, American debut, big hype, undefeated, coming to take over America. He's now, by the way, fighting a guy that's coming in on 3 weeks' notice, who is, does not look like a heavyweight champion we would think of in your mind. Much smaller, but quick hands. That's for damn sure. But anyway, Anthony Joshua took that fight. As we found out later, there was all kinds of drama going on in Anthony Joshua leading into the fight, but that does not change what Andy Ruiz did on that night, particularly because it started off very, very rough. And by the way, the crowd at the Garden that night was crazy, but it was all British. It was like, if there was, 15 or 18,000 people there, it was like half of London had flown in for the fight. This was like as close as you could get to a fight of Brits that was not in Britain. It was very reminiscent of fights in America that I had covered involving Ricky Hatton, involving Lennox Lewis, Prince Nassim Ahmed, where the Joe Calzaghe, where those fans do a great job of traveling. But they, Madison Square Garden was very boisterous on that night. And it looked very bad for Andy Ruiz early on because, Anthony Joshua came out strong, came out fast. He dropped him in the third round. And it looked like he was going to end the fight, and it was going to be, that's all she wrote. Just so, quick and easy, drill the late replacement and move on to bigger and better things. Remember, at this time, the Deontay Wilder fight was still a hot and heavy fight everybody wanted to see. Deontay was the guy with the other belt. He was still undefeated. But in the third round, Anthony Joshua, after he scored the knockdown, guess what? Andy Ruiz got off the deck and dropped him, and then dropped him again. And then, it was a close fight. They were basically, it was a very tight fight on the scorecards going into round number 7. And that's when he got dropped 2 more times and was completely discombobulated, and the referee ended up stopping the fight. Some people suggest that Anthony Joshua quit. I would tell you that he was concussed on one of those big knockdowns and just had
Yep.
no idea, where in the heck he was. And halfway through that 7th round, they waved off the fight, and the combination of silence, but with the crowd that was a small group that was cheering for Andy, was so weird because you could almost tell it was like a few people going nuts, and everybody else was like, could not believe what had just happened. And it was. I was like remembering talking to other people that were there, and we're thinking back, like I had covered basically every fight at the Garden, for like 20 years at that point. I couldn't think of a bigger upset. Nobody could really think of a bigger upset. I'm sure in the history of Madison Square Garden, for all the fights that they've done back, decades and decades and decades, I'm sure there is another upset. But in terms of the more modern time, at least in the 20 some years since the turn of the century, let's call it in 2000, there hadn't been that kind of upset, with the heavyweight titles changing hands like that in such a circumstance. We're such a heavy favorite losing.
Completely out of the blue, and not just that he lost or somehow
The
got
way
nipped
he
by
lost.
decision. The way he lost, uh, and I think the argument can be made he was really not the same fighter ever again after that.
I
He's
agree
still
with that.
fighting. He's
I
still
agree.
fighting at the time frame that we're doing this video. But Andy Ruiz busted him with the big right hand. You mentioned concussed him. It was weird after the fight because Joshua, if you remember during the post-fight interview, I still have this image years later. He's smiling and waving at people that he knows while he's being asked what happened. And then he goes to give an answer and it's an incoherent answer. It's like he's still in London mentally. He got knocked across the Atlantic
And
mentally that
remember when
night.
the,
It was
when the,
that shocking, that stunning.
and when this fight ended, though, it was so close. I mean, there had been multiple knockdowns already, but it was 57-56 on two scorecards in favor of Ruiz, and it was the same score, 57-56 in favor of Joshua. So if he's able to survive that round, obviously it's going to wind up as a big deficit because he loses that round with the two knockdowns. But it was still within the points. You're still on track to still be able to possibly win the fight. So that was just earth shaking. And I remember at the press conference, Andy's, just how emotional he was about, talking about how, my mom's never going to have to work again and we can, do all these things that we need to do financially. I mean, Andy had made like okay money. Remember, he had fought for a heavyweight title before and took a close loss to Joseph Parker, and had been on some bigger shows and,
Am I
was an
not correct? The
undefeated
family
contender.
had a construction company and he was working construction in
Yeah.
the construction company. Didn't have to work construction anymore after that and after the rematch. That's for
No, he
sure.
made a tremendous amount of money. Well, he made good money in the first fight, but then he obviously had a certain number locked in for the rematch that was contracted. They ended up holding out, actually making a new deal, and he got a better deal for the rematch, even though probably he already had it agreed to, but he basically, like a basketball or football player decides to hold out, and they got a better deal. But 6 months later, after celebrating for 6 months, he was totally out of shape mentally and physically. He went to Diriyah, Saudi Arabia, right outside of Riyadh. This is before Turkey started running all the events there, but they had built like an outdoor stadium for this one. Or I guess they did a couple events there, but the boxing event was the main thing. And Joshua fought a perfect game plan and completely outboxed and shut him down and won, 10 rounds to 2, 11 rounds to 1 on the cards to regain the title. So he was, in essence, a one-hit wonder, but you can never take that away from him
Nope.
for scoring that kind of knockout. Now, the crazy thing is, ever since that rematch that Joshua won against him in December of 2019, for which Andy Ruiz made like in excess of $10 million, he's only had 3 fights. He fought once in 2021, a win over Chris Arreola. He fought once in 2022. That was the win against Luis Ortiz. And then he didn't fight again until last August, in August of 2024. That was the draw that he had on the Riyadh season card that was headlined by Terrence Crawford and Madrimov. He fought Gerald Miller, the guy that he had taken the place of in the fight. So he kind of owes Gerald Miller a debt of gratitude for taking all those PEDs, because without it, he doesn't get the opportunity to fight Anthony Joshua. And there was so much drama after that, TJ, because of the questions, at first, was he going to exercise the rematch? What went wrong? There was a lot of stories about what was going on in the dressing room and getting knocked down and sparring and some chaos involving his father and this and that. Whatever it was, though, we put it behind him and he won the rematch. But again, that first fight, exciting, a rockin' garden, big upset, historical thing. I mean, it was a pleasure and it was an honor to be there ringside.
All right. So I pose this to you as I've done before, but for the audience watching this, I'm curious. Where does it rank on the all-time meter? The fights I will list are a young Cassius Clay stunning Sonny Liston in their first fight, where he was a decided underdog and he dominated him. Buster Douglas's win over Mike Tyson, which I am partial to, so I'm kind of tainting this, but I'm putting it to you. And then let's also throw in Leon Spinks as the Olympic champion, stunning Muhammad Ali in his ninth pro fight, 1978. The greatest second loss ever of his career at that time came to Leon Spinks. Where does the Ruiz upset of Anthony Joshua factor into those other three I mentioned? What do you
I
think?
mean, I would also put in that little group of fights you mentioned. I would definitely also include Hasim Rahman knocking out
All right.
Lennox Lewis in South Africa to win the title as well.
So we got five of them.
It
Where does
actually
Ruiz Joshua fit in?
Ruiz Joshua to me is in the same sort of level as what happened with Rockman and Lewis. Now Rockman was not a late replacement in that fight, but also a significant underdog against a very well respected, legit champion, top level guy. They're both from Britain, Lewis and Joshua. Obviously, Lennox was the lineal champion. Anthony Joshua was not that, but he did have three of the belts. He was undefeated. Lennox was not undefeated when Rockman knocked him out. But it fits in that level. I'm partial to Tyson versus Douglas too. I don't care what anybody says. That was absolutely fucking conceivable. Like Joshua beating, or I'm sorry, Ruiz beating Joshua, unlikely but conceivable. I mean, he was a good heavyweight, not a great heavyweight, but everybody respected his speed and power. He had just fought, although not against a super top guy, but not a bum in Dimitrenko. He had scored a knockout. Joshua was coming to a new country, to a place he had never fought before. So again, I'm not going to sit here and in retrospect say, oh, everybody thought it was a good chance that he would win. No, that's not the truth. But looking back, it was not inconceivable. Tyson losing to Buster was inconceivable. He was untouchable, unbeatable. He was destroying fighters better than Buster Douglas. And so to see that happen is still, 40 years later, the biggest shocker, I think, not just in boxing, but in sports, frankly, as big as it gets.
I don't disagree. And again,
it's not on that level.
We were not alive, in fairness, for the upset of Sonny Liston and what Cassius Clay did, but it was a different age too in terms of TV, technology, media, no internet, whatever. Certainly,
but you got to remember that Cassius Clay was an Olympic gold medalist.
That's right.
It wasn't like he was some guy coming out of nowhere.
That's
Granted,
right.
his light heavyweight, he won the light heavyweight gold medal, not the heavyweight gold medal. And Sonny Liston was a fearsome knockout artist and all that. But Ali had that background. Andy Ruiz was a good amateur, but he wasn't an Olympic gold medalist.
And by the way, Spinks obviously won a gold medal back in 78. Leon Spinks we're talking about. But
76 he won the gold.
76, but in 78, Muhammad Ali's faded some at that point. It's a little more understandable. Spinks highly motivated for the chance.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Leon had a draw in his record or a loss?
I believe so.
Record?
I think he was 7-0-1 going into the fight.
Yeah.
Ninth professional fight. I believe that's correct. But my point is that was not a knockout by Leon Spinks. Buster Douglas knocked Mike Tyson out. So you and I are kind of partial.
And like Andy Ruiz, Buster got off the deck from being knocked down against Tyson to knock him out. The same way Andy Ruiz got knocked down by Joshua and got up not only to knock him down the one time, but multiple times and score the stoppage. It was just an amazing, very memorable night to be a boxing writer or a boxing fan.